The evening in San Diego was thick with ocean mist as it rolled in from the Pacific, wrapping around the towering glass mansion perched on the cliffs of La Jolla. Valentina Rodriguez, 34, founder and CEO of Rodriguez Tech Empire, stepped out of her silver Maserati after what felt like the longest board meeting of her life. The dashboard clock glowed 5:20 p.m., remarkably early for a woman who typically didn't see home until well past midnight. Something inexplicable had been pulling at her all day, an urgent whisper in her mind telling her to return to the sprawling estate that had become more like a beautiful tomb than a family home. 19 months had passed since the accident that shattered everything. The memory still haunted her dreams, the family ski trip to Aspen, the avalanche that came out of nowhere, the desperate search through the snow. Her husband, Diego, hadn't made it out alive. But somehow, miraculously and tragically, their twin daughters had survived, though the doctors said they might never walk again. Aurora and Luna, now 7 years old, had been vibrant forces of nature before that terrible February day. They used to race through the mansion's marble corridors on their little legs, their laughter echoing off the vaulted ceilings like music. Aurora, with her wild curly hair and adventurous spirit, had been the leader, always climbing trees and convincing her more cautious sister to join her adventures. Luna, thoughtful and artistic, would spend hours drawing pictures of butterflies and rainbows, her quiet wisdom surprising adults with its depth. Now they sat in matching custom wheelchairs, silent as porcelain dolls, their once bright eyes staring at nothing. The specialists Valentina had flown in from around the world, neurologists from Johns Hopkins, physical therapists from Switzerland, child psychologists from Stockholm, all delivered the same devastating verdict. The girls had retreated so far into themselves that they seemed unreachable. They hadn't spoken a word since the day they were pulled from the snow. They barely acknowledged anyone's presence, existing in a world that seemed to have no room for joy, hope, or connection. The Rodriguez estate sprawled across 12 acres of prime La Jolla coastline, a modernist masterpiece of steel, glass, and stone that Valentina had designed herself in the early days of her tech empire. 45,000 square feet of cutting-edge architecture, infinity pools, and smart home technology that responded to voice commands, commands that no longer came because her daughters no longer spoke. The house felt cursed. Every room held memories of laughter that had been silenced, of tiny feet that no longer ran, of bedtime stories that were now read to unresponsive listeners. Valentina had considered selling it a dozen times, but she couldn't bear the thought of taking the girls away from the only home they'd ever known, even if it had become a monument to their loss. Only Esperanza remained constant through the revolving door of caregivers and specialists. Esperanza Delacroix, 26, had arrived from New Orleans 6 weeks ago after the previous caretaker, a stern German woman with decades of experience, had resigned, claiming the children were completely unreachable and that she'd never encountered such a challenging case. Esperanza was different from all the others who had come before her. Where the previous caregivers had been clinical and professional, Esperanza brought warmth. She was a Creole woman with gentle amber eyes and a musical accent that carried hints of French, Spanish, and something uniquely Louisiana. She'd studied special education at Tulane University before moving to California to be closer to her elderly grandmother in Los Angeles. Unlike the others who grew frustrated with Aurora and Luna's silence, Esperanza seemed content to simply be present with them, talking softly about her day, singing old Creole lullabies, or reading stories even though the girls never responded. Valentina had hired her more out of desperation than hope. The previous 6 caregivers had all quit within weeks, unable to handle the emotional toll of caring for children who seemed to have vanished inside themselves. But there was something about Esperanza's application that had stood out, not her impressive credentials, but a single line in her cover letter: "Sometimes healing begins not with trying to fix what's broken, but with loving what remains." As Valentina walked up the sweeping stone steps to her front door, the weight of another day pressed down on her shoulders. The house loomed before her, all sharp angles and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered breathtaking views of the Pacific. But inside, she knew, was the same suffocating silence that had settled over their lives like dust. The main hall was vast and empty, her footsteps echoing on the polished concrete floors. Custom art pieces worth millions hung on the walls, but they felt cold and meaningless now. The smart home system recognized her presence and automatically adjusted the lighting and temperature, but even the most advanced technology couldn't fill a house with life. She set down her leather briefcase and loosened her blazer, preparing for another evening of quiet dinners and one-sided conversations with daughters who existed more like ghosts than children. The house was always too quiet now, no running feet, no arguments over toys, no questions about why the sky was blue or where babies came from. But then she heard something that made her freeze. Music. Faint but unmistakable, drifting through the house like a half-remembered dream. A woman's voice, singing in what sounded like French, accompanied by, could it be? Was that splashing water? And underneath it all, something that made Valentina's heart skip a beat, the sound of children's voices. Not crying or calling for help, but something she hadn't heard in 19 months, laughter. Her breath caught in her throat. She must be imagining it. The grief specialists had warned her about auditory hallucinations, about the mind's cruel way of creating sounds that the heart desperately wanted to hear. But the sounds continued, growing clearer as she moved through the house. Past the formal dining room where family meals had become solitary affairs. Past the library where thousands of books sat unread since Diego's death. Past the girls' playroom where toys sat untouched like artifacts in a museum. The sounds were coming from the back of the house, from the direction of the infinity pool that overlooked the ocean. Valentina's pulse quickened as she approached the floor-to-ceiling glass doors that led to the pool deck. The doors were slightly ajar, letting in the evening breeze and the sound of, yes, definitely laughter. She moved closer, her hands trembling as she reached for the door handle. Through the glass, she could see movement in the illuminated pool, the underwater lights casting dancing patterns on the water's surface. What she saw when she stepped outside made her legs buckle. Aurora and Luna were in the pool. Not sitting on the edge in their wheelchairs. Not being held up by flotation devices or supported by some mechanical contraption. They were actually in the water, moving, swimming, their small bodies cutting through the chlorinated blue like they were born to it. Esperanza was with them, her dark hair slicked back with water, her voice soft and melodious as she sang an old Creole song about mermaids and ocean magic. She held Aurora's hands gently, guiding her through the water while the little girl, Valentina's little girl who hadn't smiled in over a year, was giggling with pure, unfiltered joy. "Look at you, little mermaid," Esperanza said in her musical accent, "you're swimming like you were born in the bayou." Aurora's response hit Valentina like a physical blow. "Miss Esperanza, am I really swimming? Really truly?" Her daughter had spoken. After 19 months of silence, after countless therapy sessions and specialists who had begun to suggest that the girls might never speak again, Aurora was talking to this young woman from New Orleans who had been with them for barely 6 weeks. Luna floated nearby, her movements more cautious but equally miraculous. She was doing something that looked like a modified backstroke, her face turned up toward the darkening sky, a serene smile playing on her lips, the first smile Valentina had seen from either of her daughters since before the accident. "Miss Esperanza," Luna's voice was soft but clear, "the water feels like flying." Esperanza laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "That's because you are flying, little angel. In the water, we can all fly." Valentina gripped the door frame so tightly her knuckles went white. She watched in stunned silence as her daughters, her broken, silent daughters, played in the water like normal children. They were taking turns doing small kicks, cheering each other on with voices she thought she might never hear again. "Aurora, watch this," Luna called out, attempting to float on her back. When she managed it for a few seconds, both girls erupted in delighted laughter. "You did it!" Aurora clapped her hands, sending water splashing everywhere. "Miss Esperanza, did you see? Luna is a floating star." The billionaire who had built a tech empire worth over $3 billion, who had revolutionized artificial intelligence and machine learning, who had stood before Congress and defended her innovations without a tremor in her voice, crumpled to her knees on the pool deck and sobbed like a child. For the first time since that terrible day in Aspen, her daughters were truly alive. Esperanza noticed her first, her eyes widening with concern and surprise. She began guiding the girls toward the shallow end of the pool, her voice gentle but worried. "Mrs. Rodriguez. I'm so sorry. I know you have rules about the pool, but the girls seemed so interested today when we walked past, and the warm weather was so perfect, and I remembered reading that hydrotherapy can be beneficial for spinal injuries, and they seemed so eager to try." "Please don't stop," Valentina managed to choke out through her tears. "Please don't ever stop." Aurora and Luna had gone quiet, looking between their mother and Esperanza with uncertainty. They weren't used to seeing their mother cry. She'd been so careful to stay strong in front of them, to never let them see her break down. Valentina crawled to the edge of the pool, her expensive suit jacket trailing on the wet concrete. "My babies," she whispered, reaching out toward them. "My beautiful babies." For a moment, the girls hesitated. Then, slowly, they began moving toward her through the water. It wasn't graceful, their movements were still affected by their injuries, but they were moving under their own power, propelling themselves toward their mother with determination that took Valentina's breath away. "Mama," Aurora said, her voice small but real, "we're swimming. Miss Esperanza taught us how to be mermaids." "I can see that, sweetheart," Valentina sobbed, reaching down to touch Aurora's wet face. "You're the most beautiful mermaids I've ever seen." Luna swam closer, her movements careful but purposeful. "Mama, why are you crying? Are you sad?" "No, baby," Valentina laughed through her tears, "Mama is happy. Mama is so happy." Esperanza stood waist-deep in the pool, watching the reunion with tears in her own eyes. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, and the infinity pool seemed to blend seamlessly with the ocean beyond, creating the illusion that they were all floating in an endless sea of possibility. "Girls," Esperanza said softly, "why don't you show your mama that floating trick we practiced?" For the next hour, as the sky darkened and the pool lights created an underwater galaxy, Valentina watched her daughters play in the water. They couldn't walk, the doctors had been right about that, but in the water, they could fly. They could laugh. They could be children again. Later, after Esperanza had helped the girls out of the pool and into warm terry cloth robes, after they'd been dried off and tucked into their beds with stories about underwater kingdoms and mermaid adventures, Valentina stood alone on her balcony overlooking the pool. The water was still now, reflecting the stars that had begun to appear in the clear San Diego sky. But she could still hear the echo of her daughters' laughter carried on the ocean breeze, still see the wonder in their eyes as they discovered they could move through water like dolphins. Something had awakened in her house today. Something miraculous had emerged from the chlorinated depths of her infinity pool, guided by the gentle hands and patient heart of a young woman from New Orleans who saw magic where everyone else saw only medical limitations. The silence that had suffocated her home for 19 months had been broken not by expensive therapies or renowned specialists, but by laughter, by water, and by someone who understood that sometimes healing required not fixing what was broken, but nurturing what remained whole. As Valentina finally headed inside, she caught sight of Esperanza in the girls' room, sitting between their beds and singing softly in Creole. Aurora and Luna were both asleep, but their faces were peaceful in a way she hadn't seen since before the accident. They looked like children again instead of patients. For the first time in 19 months, Valentina Rodriguez went to sleep believing that tomorrow might bring miracles she hadn't dared to hope for. The house that had felt like a tomb was breathing again, filled with the sound of possibilities she thought were lost forever. And in the pool outside, the water held the memory of laughter, waiting for tomorrow's magic to begin. The morning after the pool discovery dawned gray and overcast, typical marine layer clouds blanketing San Diego's coastline. But inside the Rodriguez estate, something had fundamentally shifted. For the first time in 19 months, Valentina woke to the sound of her daughters' voices drifting up from the breakfast room, not the silence that had become her daily companion, but actual conversation. "Miss Esperanza, can we swim again today?" Aurora's voice carried up the marble staircase, bright with anticipation. "Please?" "We practiced floating in our dreams," Luna added, her softer voice still audible enough to make Valentina's heart soar. Valentina dressed quickly, choosing a casual blouse instead of her usual power suit. For the first time in months, work felt secondary to being present for whatever magic was happening in her home. As she descended the curved staircase, she could see the three of them through the breakfast room's glass walls, Aurora and Luna in their wheelchairs at the table, Esperanza serving fresh fruit and talking animatedly about dolphins and how they breathe. The scene looked so normal, so wonderfully ordinary, that Valentina had to pause and catch her breath. This was what family breakfast was supposed to feel like. "Good morning, mermaids," Valentina said as she entered the room, using the nickname that had emerged the night before. "Mama," both girls chorused, their faces lighting up in ways that made Valentina's chest tight with emotion. "Miss Esperanza says dolphins are mammals like us, which means they need air to breathe just like we do," Aurora announced importantly. "And they swim in families called pods." "Perhaps our family is a pod now," Luna said thoughtfully, then looked shyly at Esperanza. "Is that okay, Miss Esperanza? Can you be in our pod?" Esperanza's amber eyes glistened as she set down the orange juice. "I would be honored to be in your pod, little mermaid." Valentina watched this exchange with growing warmth, but also with a nagging worry that she couldn't quite name. Everything felt too good, too miraculous. In her business experience, sudden positive changes often came with unexpected complications. That complication arrived at 10:30 a.m. in the form of Dr. Margaret Steinberg, the renowned neurologist Valentina had flown in from Boston 3 months earlier. Dr. Steinberg had been scheduled for a routine checkup with the twins, part of their ongoing medical monitoring. The 60-something doctor entered the house with her usual clinical efficiency, carrying her leather medical bag and wearing the expression of someone who dealt in facts, not hope. Valentina had always respected Dr. Steinberg's expertise, but today the woman's presence felt intrusive, almost threatening to the delicate magic that had taken root in their home. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Dr. Steinberg said briskly, adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses. "I trust the girls are maintaining their physical therapy routine?" "Actually, Dr. Steinberg, something remarkable has happened," Valentina began, but the doctor was already moving toward the living room where Aurora and Luna waited with Esperanza. What Dr. Steinberg saw there made her stop short. The twins were on the floor, not in their wheelchairs, but actually on the carpet, propped up on cushions while Esperanza demonstrated swimming motions with her arms. "And this is how dolphins move their tails," Esperanza was saying, making fluid movements that the girls were trying to mimic. "Girls," Dr. Steinberg's voice cut through the scene like ice, "you should be in your chairs. The floor exercises we discussed are very specific." "But Dr. Steinberg," Aurora interrupted, her voice excited, "we swam yesterday." "Really swam? Miss Esperanza taught us how to be water dolphins." The doctor's expression shifted from confusion to something approaching alarm. "You were in water? Unsupervised aquatic activity?" She turned sharply to Valentina. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I specifically advised against any water activities without proper medical supervision and specialized equipment." Esperanza stood slowly, her usual calm demeanor flickering slightly. The water therapy seemed to be beneficial. "Water therapy?" Dr. Steinberg's voice rose. "Are you a licensed physical therapist? A medical professional? Because putting children with severe spinal trauma into water without proper protocols could cause additional injury." The brightness in Aurora and Luna's faces began to dim, confusion and worry replacing their earlier joy. Valentina felt her protective instincts flare. "Dr. Steinberg, with respect, my daughters were laughing yesterday for the first time in over a year. They were speaking, moving, engaged with life again. Temporary euphoria is common in cases of spinal injury," Dr. Steinberg interrupted, pulling out her tablet and beginning to type notes. "False hope can be more damaging than no hope at all. Miss," she looked at Esperanza expectantly. "Delacroix," Esperanza said quietly. "Miss Delacroix is not qualified to make decisions about these children's care. I'll need to examine them immediately to ensure no damage was done." She looked directly at Esperanza, her tone sharp. "And I'll need to discuss proper boundaries with the household staff." The word staff hung in the air like a slap. Esperanza's face flushed, but she maintained her composure. Aurora and Luna looked between the adults, their earlier joy evaporating. "Are we in trouble?" Luna whispered. "Did we do something wrong?" Aurora's voice was small, uncertain. Valentina felt something fierce and protective rise in her chest. "No, babies, you did nothing wrong. Dr. Steinberg is just concerned about your safety." But the doctor was already setting up her examination equipment, her movements sharp and efficient. "Girls, I need you back in your chairs immediately. This floor positioning is inappropriate." As Esperanza moved to help the twins back into their wheelchairs, Valentina caught the look that passed between her daughters and their caregiver, a look of shared sadness, as if something beautiful was being taken away from them. The examination proceeded in clinical silence. Dr. Steinberg checked reflexes, measured range of motion, asked standard questions that the girls answered in increasingly quiet voices. The vibrant children from breakfast had retreated back into themselves, responding with minimal words. When the examination was finished, Dr. Steinberg requested a private meeting with Valentina in the study. Esperanza took the twins to their room, ostensibly for rest time, but Valentina could see it was really to escape the tension that now filled the house. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Dr. Steinberg began once they were alone, "I understand your desire to see improvement, but what I witnessed today concerns me greatly. My daughters spoke more in the last 18 hours than they have in the last 18 months, Valentina replied, trying to keep her voice level. "Temporary behavioral changes don't indicate neurological healing," the doctor said, pulling up files on her tablet. "The spinal damage is permanent. Creating false expectations through unqualified interventions will only cause more psychological trauma when reality reasserts itself." Valentina studied the older woman's face, seeing genuine concern mixed with professional superiority. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that this caregiver may be creating an unhealthy dynamic. The girls are becoming emotionally dependent on someone who doesn't understand the medical realities of their condition." Dr. Steinberg leaned forward. "I've seen this before, charismatic caregivers who mean well but ultimately cause more harm than good. Esperanza has brought my daughters back to life. Esperanza has created an illusion that will shatter when the girls realize their limitations haven't actually changed." The doctor's voice softened slightly. "I know this is hard to hear, but sometimes loving care means accepting difficult truths." After Dr. Steinberg left, the house felt different again, not the suffocating silence of before, but a tense quiet, as if everyone was walking on eggshells. Esperanza moved through her duties with unusual quietness, and the twins seemed subdued during lunch. That afternoon, Valentina found herself working from her home office, unable to concentrate on quarterly reports and acquisition proposals. Through her window, she could see the pool, its surface still and empty. She made a decision. Around 4 p.m., she closed her laptop and went looking for Esperanza and the girls. She found them in the library, Esperanza reading quietly while Aurora and Luna worked on coloring books, a return to the silent activities that had characterized their lives before yesterday's breakthrough. "Who wants to go swimming?" Valentina announced. 3 faces looked up in surprise. "But the doctor said," Esperanza began. "The doctor said a lot of things," Valentina interrupted gently. "But she didn't see what I saw yesterday. She didn't hear what I heard." Aurora's face brightened tentatively. "Can we really swim again?" "We can do whatever makes you happy and healthy," Valentina said firmly. "And yesterday, swimming made you both very happy." An hour later, all 3 of them were in the pool. Valentina had changed into a swimsuit for the first time since Diego's death, determined to be part of whatever healing was happening in the water. She watched in amazement as her daughters transformed once again, their bodies finding grace and freedom in the chlorinated blue that was impossible on land. "Look, Mama!" Aurora called out, managing a few strokes of what could generously be called a dog paddle. "I'm swimming to you." Valentina met her daughter in the middle of the pool, gathering her into a floating hug that felt like the most natural thing in the world. "You're amazing, sweetheart." Luna joined them, her movements more cautious but equally determined. "Miss Esperanza, are you proud of us?" I'm so proud I think my heart might float right out of my chest, Esperanza replied, her accent warm with emotion. As they played in the water, Esperanza shared more about her background. She'd grown up in the bayous of Louisiana, where water was part of daily life. Her grandmother, a traditional healer, had always said that water held special properties for healing, not medical cures, but spiritual and emotional restoration. In my culture, Esperanza explained as she helped Luna practice floating, we believe water connects us to something larger than ourselves. It holds us when we can't hold ourselves. Is that why we feel different in the water? Luna asked with 7-year-old directness. Maybe, Esperanza smiled. Or maybe it's because in the water, we remember that our bodies can do beautiful things, even when they work differently than other people's bodies. Valentina felt tears prick her eyes as she watched this conversation. This young woman wasn't giving her daughters false hope, she was giving them a different way to understand their reality. That evening, after the girls were asleep, Valentina and Esperanza sat on the pool deck with cups of tea, watching the lights of San Diego twinkle in the distance. Dr. Steinberg thinks I'm being harmful, Esperanza said quietly. Dr. Steinberg sees medical conditions. I see my children, Valentina replied. There's a difference. Esperanza was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. Mrs. Rodriguez, I need to tell you something. I didn't come here just for this job. Valentina turned to look at her, heart rate quickening. My little sister had spina bifida, Esperanza continued. She died when she was 8, not from her condition, but from pneumonia. But before she died, she taught our whole family that being different wasn't the same as being broken. Her voice caught slightly. When I saw your job posting, describing 2 little girls who had stopped talking, I knew I had to try to help. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because people don't usually hire caregivers with personal emotional investment. They want professional distance. Esperanza looked out at the pool. But I don't know how to care for children with distance. I only know how to love them. Valentina reached over and took Esperanza's hand. That's exactly why you're perfect for this job. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Valentina was in her office when her housekeeper announced that someone was there to see her, a woman who introduced herself as Dr. Carmen Vasquez, a pediatric neurologist specializing in innovative treatments for spinal injuries. Dr. Vasquez was younger than Dr. Steinberg, with kind dark eyes and an immediately warm demeanor. Mrs. Rodriguez, I hope you don't mind the unscheduled visit. I heard about your daughters from a colleague, and I wanted to discuss some new research we're conducting. What kind of research? Aquatic therapy combined with adaptive technology. We're finding remarkable results in children with spinal trauma, not cures, but significant improvements in quality of life, motor function, and psychological well-being. Valentina felt her pulse quicken. You mean swimming therapy is actually beneficial? More than beneficial, it's revolutionary. We're developing specialized underwater mobility devices that could allow your daughters to experience true 3-dimensional movement. Water provides the perfect environment for neuroplasticity development. Dr. Vasquez spent the next hour explaining cutting-edge treatments that sounded like science fiction but were grounded in solid research. When she met Aurora and Luna, her interaction was completely different from Dr. Steinberg's clinical approach. I hear you 2 are excellent swimmers, she said, sitting at their level instead of standing over them. We're learning to be mermaids, Aurora said proudly. That's perfect, Dr. Vasquez smiled. Because the best swimmers in our program call themselves mermaids too. As Dr. Vasquez left, she handed Valentina a business card. Mrs. Rodriguez, your daughters are perfect candidates for our program. And from what I observed today, their caregiver has exceptional instincts about aquatic therapy. That evening, Valentina called Dr. Steinberg to inform her that they would be transitioning to Dr. Vasquez's care. The conversation was tense but professional. Mrs. Rodriguez, I strongly advise against experimental treatments, Dr. Steinberg warned. Dr. Steinberg, I strongly believe in treatments that make my daughters happy, Valentina replied. A week later, the house had settled into a new rhythm. Dr. Vasquez visited twice weekly, bringing specialized equipment and techniques that enhanced what Esperanza had intuited naturally. Aurora and Luna were enrolled in an adaptive swimming program that validated everything they'd discovered in their home pool. Most importantly, they were talking, laughing, and engaging with life in ways that went far beyond their swimming abilities. They asked questions, told jokes, demanded bedtime stories, and occasionally had typical 7-year-old meltdowns, all signs of normal emotional development that had been absent since the accident. One evening, as Valentina tucked them into bed, Aurora asked, "Mama, are we still broken?" "Miss Esperanza says we're just different kinds of perfect," Luna added sleepily. "Miss Esperanza is very wise," Valentina agreed. "And Miss Esperanza loves us even though we can't walk," Aurora continued. "Miss Esperanza loves you because of who you are, not because of what your legs can or can't do," Valentina said. "And so do I." Later that night, Valentina found Esperanza cleaning up the pool area, preparing for tomorrow's swimming session. The young woman had become so much more than a caregiver. She'd become part of their family, the missing piece that had helped them all remember how to live again. "Esperanza," Valentina said, "I want to discuss your future here." Esperanza looked up, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. "I'd like to offer you a permanent position, not as a caregiver but as... I'm not sure what the title would be. Family companion? Life coach? Miracle worker?" Esperanza laughed, the sound carrying across the water. "How about just friend?" "Friend works," Valentina smiled. "Friend with an excellent salary and benefits." As they stood by the pool where it all began, the water reflecting the stars above, Valentina reflected on how much had changed. Dr. Steinberg's warnings about false hope had been wrong. What Esperanza had given them wasn't false hope, but a different way of seeing what was possible. The twins still couldn't walk. They probably never would. But they could swim, laugh, dream, and love. They could be children instead of patients. They could look forward to tomorrow instead of being trapped in the trauma of yesterday. "You know," Esperanza said softly, "in Louisiana, we have a saying, the bayou doesn't fight the water, it learns to dance with it." "Is that what we're doing? Learning to dance with the water?" "That's what we're all doing," Esperanza replied. "Learning to dance with whatever life brings us." 3 months later, Aurora and Luna performed in their first adaptive swimming exhibition. Valentina sat in the stands, watching her daughters move through the water with grace and joy, surrounded by other children who had learned that different didn't mean less than. Dr. Vasquez's program had opened doors Valentina hadn't known existed. The twins were thriving in adaptive sports, making friends with other children who understood their challenges, and developing independence and confidence that amazed their doctors. But the real transformation had happened in their home pool, guided by a young woman from New Orleans who understood that healing sometimes required not fixing what was broken, but nurturing what remained whole. As Valentina watched Aurora and Luna race across the pool, their laughter echoing off the water, she thought about the journey that had brought them here. The accident had taken Diego and damaged her daughter's spines, but it hadn't taken their capacity for joy, love, or growth. Esperanza had simply reminded them that some of the most important things, laughter, connection, hope, couldn't be damaged by trauma. They could be buried, silenced, forgotten, but never truly broken. The house on the cliffs of La Jolla was alive again, filled with the sound of splashing water and children's voices. It was no longer a monument to loss but a celebration of resilience, love, and the extraordinary healing power of simply being seen and accepted for who you are. And in the pool where mermaids were born every day, the water held the memory of miracles, waiting for tomorrow's magic to begin.